honorary queen. Let's deal with it.
Nah, don't even want to deal with that no more. That's over.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay,
I'm
you are live on Facebook.
Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Hey.
Howdy.
Howdy. Now you'll be the one who can't hear on Zoom. We'll
I'm
talk loud.
sorry.
I said we'll talk loud because it's so hard to hear on the Zoom meetings.
Yeah, you should scoot the microphone up closer to you, Sonia. You sound a little distant.
Okay. Can you hear me? Does that sound okay?
That's so much better. Thank you.
We're gonna do a mic check. Can you hear me?
Barely.
Okay, let me turn it. How about that?
About the same.
Are you kidding me? I got a little. I'll just put a little bass in my voice today.
That's much better.
Okay.
I think it was operator error on my fault.
No, it's my voice.
All right. So can we call the meeting order? All right.
Attendance, Mr. Major,
Here.
Ms. Baum,
He's on there.
Mr. Feltner,
Here.
Ms. Holycroft, here, Mr. Keller.
I'm here for a while and I'll be out, but I'll be back because I know Sean will go long.
No, he's not. Mr. Stiller,
Here.
Mr. Siebert.
He's absent today.
He's absent today. That is the attendance.
All right. So we'd like to approve the minutes from our October 20, oh, sorry, wrong one, sorry. We'd like to approve the minutes from our November 19th meeting. So
There is one correction that has to be made to the minutes. Right to Work program is not Partners in Hope's continuum of care.
Team of care, yeah, they're located in Partners in Hope's building, but it is run by the Continuum of Care. We just wanted to make sure that was clarified.
any other items that need to be updated or either amended? No?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I second it.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Opposed? No, none opposed. Okay. All right. So that was quick. So now we're in the city of Troy law enforcement, Mr. McKinney. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you. Do I need to use the microphone here again?
I don't have a microphone for you.
All right.
Did I drop
If it would be more comfortable to sit at a desk in front of a mic, that's fine too, Sean.
That work better?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Set one on the podium. Does it reach?
Yeah, one reach.
You made it work.
How's that? Can everybody hear me in Zoom land?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I was going to start out today a little bit about talking about some of the updates we've done in the police department. Not only since the HRC has been created, but also some of them were started when Chief Phelps was still here, but most of these have been instituted since I've become chief. And I think, a lot of these have been as a direct result of some of the recommendations I've heard made and discussions made here in the HRC committee. The policy and procedure and our union contracts are published online. If you go to the troyohio.gov website and go to the police department, if you look on the left-hand side, you'll be able to see those links. The policy and procedure manual isn't a live policy and procedure manual, so any updates from that date it was published aren't on there quite yet. In that policy and procedure manual, We published that right after we instituted the prohibition on chokeholds and vascular neck restraints. Kind of as a side note on that, as far as training goes, I remember a discussion we had on defensive tactics in 1995 when I went through the Basic Police Academy about chokeholds. At that time, OPADA did not teach chokeholds, because I went to London, Ohio, the Ohio Police Officer Training Academy that is run by the state of Ohio. And the instructor there said, it's not a part of the curriculum. We don't teach them. If you know how to use them because you've gone through a self-defense class or some other kind of martial arts, you need to check with your department before you utilize those. So as far back as 1995, they weren't being taught officially by the state. Now, a lot of our people have, some martial arts training, so they may have picked that up. But now we have an official policy that prohibits them unless deadly force is warranted. The accrediting body for us said that chokeholds need to be banned, but vascular neck restraints can be used if you do annual training. We chose not to do annual training, so therefore the vascular neck restraints are also banned unless deadly force is warranted.
John, if you don't mind, so when would deadly force be something needed? Can you kind of talk to us about, under what circumstances you feel the officers would need to do that?
Well, I mean, officially by policy, it's to defend your life or the life of another from death or serious physical harm.
Okay.
We would seriously hope that you're not in a position where you're rolling around on the ground with somebody where you're in a potential where it's probably going to be a one-on-one situation where the officer feels their life slipping away, or, I mean, it's the most dire of circumstances. So, I mean, if you're in a position to do one of those chokeholds or vascular neck restraints, though, I mean, it's got to be a last-ditch effort, and we're not wanting to get into a ground fight with somebody. I mean, that's not our purpose in the first place. We want to avoid that ground fight in a one-on-one position where it escalates to a position where it's a life or death situation.
Right.
When officers shoot, in understanding that sometimes you probably just react, but is there a way to shoot non-lethally? Is that like before you shoot lethally, or?
We train to shoot at center mass.
Okay.
But our training is not to shoot to kill, it's to shoot to stop the aggressive act. We're getting better as not as an industry, but as police departments study what happens when officers are under stress and do fire their weapon, that, you've got that tunnel vision and your heart's beating 1,000,000 miles an hour and you're under a lot of stress, that, we have to train to stop, reassess the situation, and make the decision whether or not to continue shooting or if the threat has stopped. If you get on YouTube, and I recently went to a class that showed several examples, both good and bad. An excellent situation that was, if you look up, it was a Cincinnati suburb officer that shot a hitchhiker out on I-75, I think maybe about 2 or 3 years ago. And he fired one shot and he backed up and he kept on backing. The guy had a knife and was walking towards him the entire time. So that initial swing of the knife constituted the threat in the one shot, and then he backs up and tried to de-escalate, tried to create distance, de-escalation technique by creating distance. He tried to use verbal commands to tell him to drop the knife. Eventually, the wound caused him to not be able to move forward towards him anymore, and I think the subject survived. So, if you're asking officers to shoot to wound, first of all, even though we go through training and we shoot, at least in Troy, twice a year, and some people do it as a hobby, under that stressful condition, when people are moving and running and there's cover, we're not very good shots. If you look at it statistically, we miss a lot.
benefit to have more shooting time or training time? for
The
officers?
training, we try to get more moving and shooting incorporated into it. The state test, the state qualification is just standing in front of a stationary target. The most movement you do is one step to the right and one step to the left. That's the most movement you do on the state qualification. We've had additional training at the police department that we have decided it's important and put on our own to incorporate more movements. And it varies from year to year, and it varies from instructor to instructor. But to now say that, your goal is to shoot for an arm or a leg, your chances of actually hitting the person when there's a imminent threat coming towards you or to somebody else decreases even further. We've updated the report to council, and I think you guys get a copy of that in your packets to include both the number of complaints, uses of force, and the traffic stop data. Today, I signed and published a duty to intervene policy that is being mandated by our accrediting body. It's also actually been mandated by an executive order under President Trump. And it's already law, basically. It's already case law, it's already court law that you have a duty to intervene. We are just taking that case law and putting it in policy. We're hoping to get body cameras in the 2021 budget request, and we've also increased training in the 2021 budget request, and we're hoping to use that for some de-escalation training, which we're actually in the process of scheduling for March of 2021. Going into training, some of these questions or some of this presentation, a lot of it is based upon the questions I've seen in some of the correspondence from the HRC. So I know there was a question about training requirements for us. So the state requirements are pretty minimal. The state pretty much just this year, in the last 3 years, have only required our firearms qualification, which the state only requires it once a year. We do it twice a year because we want to be more advanced than just the state minimum. In 2017, the state of Ohio last required continuing professional training. Those topics included Blue Courage, which was about how officers can better interact with the public and protect themselves. Trauma-informed policing. There was a subject control or defensive tactics course as a part of that. We had to do a legal update, and then there were 4 hours that were individually set by the department. And I don't have those in front of me right now. The state mandated training stopped in 2017 because of it is dependent upon the state being able to reimburse the city for that training. And they have not given us any money since 2017. I just got the email last week that the state was not going to mandate any training in 2021, but it requested that we continue to work towards 40 hours of training per year for every officer, but there's no money for it.
Okay.
In addition, the Attorney General, David Yost, closed OPATA. Part of that was because of the coronavirus, but then he fired most of their staff. So it's been difficult this year for us to find training. The Attorney General is supposed to be working on reinventing the Ohio Police Officer Training Academy, OPATA. However, it's been a slow process. He's released some classes. He wants to make more regional classes. I guess part of his complaint was that a lot of the instructors there weren't subject matter experts in any particular topic. They were just handed a PowerPoint and said, here, teach this. And he wants those classes being taught by subject matter experts. The class I recently went to at OPATA in London, Ohio, which is state mandated new chiefs training, they talked that Attorney General Yost is also wanting to put in place licensing for police officers. Not really sure what the difference is between licensing and certification is, except for maybe licensing, it might be easier to revoke as compared to certification. And I think that's my understanding from the conversation we had is that the change to licensing, if you have an officer that is fired from another agency for cause or resigns because of an internal affairs investigation, before, you know, it's found that he did something wrong, that they're going to revoke that license. What really kind of directs our training more is our certification through the Commission for the Accreditation of Law Enforcement Agencies, or CALEA. We've been a member since 1993, and it's been voluntary. Some of the training that mandates is that we do a yearly training on lethal weapons. So for every lethal weapon we have, we do yearly, but we, again, choose to go higher than that as a city and as a police department, and we shoot twice, once at night and once during the day. The night one we consider a limited light shoot, and the daytime shoot is just a regular shoot. We train on non-lethal weapons every year. We go through our baton class. We talk about our pepper spray when it can be used. The taser is an annual requirement in addition. The CALEA requirement is every other year for less than lethal weapons, so generally. We do an annual legal update. We talk about our holding facility that we have. Every 3 years, we have to have a class in that. We do an ethics class every other year. We have a use of force written test that discusses our use of force policies. We also include our pursuit policy in that, and we have that annually. We have to talk about our all hazard plan every year and have training in that. We have mental illness training every 3 years for the entire department, and hazardous material retraining every 3 years. I'll talk a little bit more about the mental health training in a bit. And then every year we review and we try to have a discussion on different topics on our prohibition on racial profiling. That's a yearly requirement.
When you do your shooting, forgive me, I only have TV to go by, like, are there, like, the bad guy pops out, and are they diverse? And do you, like, talk about that as you're shooting? Like, if somebody, like, pops up and they have, like, in the mornings, I have my hoodie on and my sweatpants, but I'm actually an innocent person. Do you guys shoot like that? Or
The targets, the targets are a state mandated target, and they're just a white target with a black silhouette on it. And then there's center mass is marked, and then, you know, it's just a black outline of a person.
So it's not like grandma, you know what I mean? Like you said, or something. Do you think it would be beneficial if they actually added diversity, real life situation people to help the officers kind of work through those stressful potential?
We used to order, and I'm not sure why we got away from it, but we got away from it when, first of all, we had a very expensive, very nice turning target system, and that has seen too many years and doesn't work anymore. And then the state changed the qualification. So we used to have a turning target system. Those targets were much more lifelike, but I'm pretty sure that the state mandates the target too. So the state qualification has to be on this specific target. On that training note, we've also done, and it just varies from year to year, what's called Simunitions Training, which utilizes our actual firearms but shoots basically a paint powder. And so in those cases, we're moving, we're simulating different things. We also, a lot of times we'll have training with our firearms before we do the state qualification. The state qualification is very basic. The training, though, is where we can get into some of the using cover and concealment in order to shoot, moving and shooting. Shooting from a seated or laying down position if you get knocked on the ground. So, I mean, there's room to improve, definitely, for us, I believe. But the training is more important than necessarily the state qualification. And then that's where we can expand. The state qualification is you have to go through the motions. But then we on our own want to provide that additional training.
So I got a question regards to the training and simulation. Do you have virtual simulation training, or is it all?
We've used the simulations the last few years. 10 plus years ago, we had a video machine that we shared with several different agencies. And it would make its rounds to those agencies, and it was a video simulation. OPATA has a video simulation. We did driving and shooting with the OPATA video simulation maybe about 7 or 8 years ago. And so they had it set up in a trailer, and they would bring it to your department and do that. Or the driving training, motion sickness.
Oh.
It's like, it was good training, but just the way it's set up, if you're prone to motion sickness, several of us got a little queasy.
Hey, Sean, I look at all these different stats from like all these other countries, right? So there's tons of countries like, if you look at China, you look at Japan, you look at Germany, you look at Sweden, you look at, there's hundreds of other countries that have very low incidents where the police officers are actually able, well, I shouldn't say able, but they just don't kill their citizens. So within the training that you all has there been any comparisons to these other countries that have very low rates of death from a cop to a civilian? And is that anything that is being actively looked at by the police department here in Troy?
Yeah, I don't think we've actually, looked at comparisons with other countries. Maybe on a national front, and we try to send our training officers to, trainers that are subject matter experts that look into this and study this and try to find the best policies and practices to institute for training. Verbal commands are very important in our training, even during our state qualification. Our firearms instructors want us yelling verbal commands. And if you don't, they're getting on you to do that. So, and that's part of the training. We could do a better job of getting some of our, and I hope to this year with this increased funding for our training, get our firearms instructors to classes that have new and different techniques to train those officers back here in Troy, but we've never done a study of what they're doing in London or Japan as far as to avoid that. I would make a comparison that the United States is different with our love for firearms too. I don't think there's any country in the world that probably values and purchases more firearms than the United States.
I think the Philippines has us beat. But we're very close.
Training is also kind of directed toward by the individual officer. So if we have a need for an evidence technician and one of my officers say that I would like to go to evidence tech school and we believe that they're a good fit, we'll get them to that training. So kind of on an individual basis, we have a lot of specialties that we need, and since we're not a big city, we can't have a full-time evidence technician crew. So it's a collateral duty among officers that want to do it. Same goes with other things like a crash reconstructionist, instructors, our tactical response time are all kind of collateral duties that we try to match up with people that have an interest in doing it. When we have in-service training, we usually have to do it in 4 days. We divide it up in 4 days. We can't just take everybody off the road and pay everybody that's off overtime. So we divide everybody up into 4 days. We try to lessen the amount of overtime. And so that creates difficulties because we usually have a prosecutor come in and teach our legal update, whether it be a common pleas prosecutor or a municipal prosecutor. And so we have to schedule with them for them to come in 4 separate days to teach, 1 or 2 hours of legal update. And then we also want to try to coordinate, Tri-County Mental Health to come in on those same 4 days and maybe teach 3 or 4 hours of mental health training. So it's quite a feat to try to coordinate all that and get everybody in on the same date and time. If you've ever tried to get an attorney to schedule something quickly, good luck. Last mental health training we had was just this past year, during 2020. We had Tri-County Board of Mental Health come in. The classes they went over was the overview of the services they offered. They talked about emergency hospitalizations and pink slips, which Joel is kind of I would consider him a subject matter expert on our pink slip process. And then they also talked about the officer's trauma and self-care. There was a section of that. So I believe that was a 2-hour course that they did during that 8-hour training day in March. On that mental health aspect, about half of our officers are CIT trained. CIT is crisis intervention trained. It's put on by Tri-County Mental Health. It's a 1-week course. When I went through it, and I think to a certain point it still is, classrooms and scenarios. So they discuss all the different mental health diseases, and you actually go through scenarios with people that are exhibiting those signs, and some of them are shoot, don't shoot situations. They escalate to that. Some of them are just completely no weapons are even drawn. There's a ride along. I know there was a site visit to Safe Haven. Do they still do that?
Pre-corona.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have this year was a site visit to the county inpatient facility on UDMC's campus and the crisis initial office, I guess, in the UDMC ER.
Sergeant Masseri and Joel also does a lot of work with Tri-County and the CIT classes. He comes in and helps teach some of the CIT classes. I know there were some questions about some of our specific policies, so I'm going to kind of change gears here and move on to some of our policies. The residency rule used to be 5 miles. In 2006, it became Ohio law that the smallest residency rule a city could enforce was adjacent county. And that is now what our residency requirement is that you can live in Miami County or any adjacent county. It's, let's see. It is section 9.481 in the Ohio General Provisions, if anybody would want to look that up. And it's also reflected in the union contracts. Our use of force policy. It's reviewed annually, and it's been approved by CALEA. The Ohio Collaborative has also reviewed that and approved that one. Like I said, the chokehold and vascular neck restraint policy was just added here this year. We're currently reviewing, we have a separate section in that called use of force and use of deadly force. We're currently reviewing those 2 policies to make sure that de-escalation techniques are included in that. It kind of already does it uses the word necessary, only necessary force to be used. So I think that the state and CALEA are going to want to see actual de-escalation terms in that policy. So we're currently working on that. Any use of force that our officers do require a separate form called a response to resistance form. This response to resistance form, after the officer fills it out, is reviewed by his immediate supervisor, the captain then, and the chief. And we read the reports if there's a use of force, and we sign off on them. Every year, the patrol captain in January does a review of all those use of force reports and has to write a report about it.
If you are a person who believes that you were in that situation, can they get a copy of the report?
The response to resistance report would be considered a public record. Yeah. So it would be available. I can't recall anybody ever actually asking for it. I've only actually produced the response to resistance report 1 year because I was a patrol captain for 1 year. And I can kind of give you some basic numbers. In 2019, We had 74 uses of force. I'm looking for the previous years. I got it in a chart here, but it doesn't actually. To kind of go into our use of force reporting in a response to resistance, anytime somebody displays a weapon, they also have to complete this report. So as an example, I brought 2 examples here with me that were from October of this year. One of our officers backed up a deputy on a warrant arrest. The officer removed his taser from the gentleman that had the warrant. He was in the news. He was armed and dangerous. He was a burglary suspect. I'm sure if I said the name, you guys should probably recognize the name from the media coverage it got. So while the deputy was arresting him, the officer removed his taser from his holster and held it at his side. He says, at no time did I point the taser at the suspect. Once the suspect was in custody, I reholstered my taser and then assisted with collecting property and ended my involvement with the call. So this actually wasn't even our call, but we require that report to be done because the officer pulled his taser and held it to its side, and he did a use of force report. This counts as one of those 70-some incidents that happened or 2020 has been less because of, and I would say probably because of the coronavirus. I think we're at 54 use of force incidents as of right now.
How far, did they get broke? Yeah, is that as far as they get broken down, or can you say like 20 of them were African-American or mental health or women or men?
I can break them down. In 2019, 66% of our uses of force were white male, 16% white female, 17% black male, 1% black female.
I wish I was a statistician, then I could, you know what I mean, with a 4% demographic, what is that?
Yeah. And you know, this was my first year doing it, so I did it a little different than my predecessor. I broke it down to age. We had 2 uses of force against people 0 to 18, 33, 19 to 29, 30 people, 30 to 39, 12, 40 to 49, 4 were 50 to 59, and 0, 60 plus.
Hey, Sean, I'm sorry, did you said that the black use of force for male for 2019 was 17%, is that correct?
17%, correct.
I think our black population is 4%, right?
Yeah.
That's correct.
So did you look at who were the officers that had the, I guess the dominant, the officers that were involved in the use of force, were there several, or do you know, is there a common denominator? I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
I mean, we look for trends, and you know, I was unable to find any trends in 2019. So you know, it's something that is difficult to find unless you track this for several years, which we have. As far as trends against individual officers, no. Now, you know, it actually, there's probably the strongest trend we have is the shift. Our 3rd shift is the most likely shift to be involved in a use of force incident.
Right.
I would blame that on alcohol. Because if I did break that down and we tracked that on that response to resistance form, 53% of everybody, the suspects, were under the influence of drugs or alcohol that we used force against.
And is that validated with a drug test or with like a breathalyzer?
That's just based on the officer's observations.
Just an option.
So Marvin, I don't know if you can hear me, but.
Yeah.
So much like traffic stops, you can't correlate our population with that data necessarily. So the 4% and the 17% could be 2 entirely different groups of people. In other words, the 17% aren't necessarily Troy residents that we are having to interact with.
Sean, is there a breakout of where these people are from?
So
I don't track that specifically. Yeah, but I mean, it could be
It's in the individual.
by pulling each individual report and finding where they live.
So there's a 4% population in Troy. There's a black population specifically. There is a 13.1% in Ohio, and then 12.1% in the United States.
And so for Troy, we're at 4% black. That's male and female. But we're at a 17% incident rate with black males in Troy. That's kind of an outlier if you look at the statistics.
If you assume those 17% use of force instances are our population, or that those folks live here in Troy.
Well, the
Right.
That's the thing.
United States is 12.1%.
Okay. They could just be, people coming from anywhere at the bars, if they're coming from neighboring communities. There's just a variety of factors. You just can't make a one-to-one comparison, is my point.
So then is it?
I guess if we, I'm sorry, go ahead.
There's an officer that is having a lot of those excessive, are you able to tell that, I assume?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't consider, these aren't excessive force, these are uses of force.
Okay.
The term excessive force means that they use too much force given the situation.
Right.
One of the stats that I'm happy to report is that of the people we used force against, 80% were not injured. Only 20% claimed injury after force was used.
I think I was trying to glean the relationships that are being had, like, out of that 17%, if you saw that 10% was a specific officer or, again, a trend.
Right.
That's kind of what I'm interested in. I'm also interested in not necessarily if they're local to Troy, but
Right,
if they are of color
period.
and still have issues within Troy. There's this thing they say in the community, you come here on vacation and you leave on probation. So I'm trying to see, because again, I'm not very good with stats, if that's what those numbers are saying. That's what I was trying to kind of get down to that.
I mean, an excellent example of something we're currently dealing with is that there's a 15-year-old black male that we've used force against 3 times, I think, in the last month and a half or 2 months. And it's directly related to domestic violence issues with his mother, or actually his grandmother, who's 65 years old. And I actually brought that as one of the examples of how we try to de-escalate situations. I think it was the first time we arrested him this year. We spent 20 to 25 minutes trying to talk him, probation. He's on probation. We spent 20 to 25 minutes to try to talk him after probation said he needed to go to West Central for the probation violation after he failed to let his grandma get in the car and leave because the grandma told him to do some chores. And, we followed him for blocks trying to talk him into voluntarily, complying with our request to put his hands behind his back. He refused to. Even after he was handcuffed, he continued to kick the windows in the cruisers. And then when he got to West Central, he refused to get out of the car voluntarily, had to be carried out of the car and was placed in a restraint chair at West Central. So, how those numbers end up breaking down, we're always looking to make sure that we don't have an officer that is singling out one specific race. However, our officers, and we do have some officers that are in more uses of force than others, and that can vary from year to year. But we watch those to make sure that they are not having a specific race being targeted in those.
And it could be too, like following the numbers all the way down. I mean, it could be that maybe we need to look at more mental health, substance abuse, and maybe look at, again, I'm a poverty girl, whatever, but matriarchal society, are there resources that people need that we're just missing, or gap services? So I'm
Yeah,
not
that example that you use kind of seems like the gentleman had a mental disability of some sort. I mean, if you had to call, if you were involved 3 times and all 3 cases are violent with that gentleman, it seems that he has a mental defect of some sort that probably needs to be dealt with. So like in those cases, is there any way to refer someone like that instead of putting him in jail, maybe getting him some mental help Do
Well,
we have the ability to do that?
The juvenile court is definitely on top of that. You know, our role as police, you know, we do not get involved in that much. We're called to the scene because he is in this situation where grandma cannot control him. So, you know, at the point where he jumps in the car, I think he broke grandma's key ring and sat on her to physically prevent her from leaving the house and refused to get off of her. You know, it's difficult not to use force in those situations.
It sounds like he was having a mental health issue.
And also, we don't have much support. We're sitting in a senior center, but it's like one of the only supports that seniors have. So we're talking about a grandma. So again, the home has been broken, so the parents aren't there. So we can learn a lot from the numbers, and I appreciate knowing the numbers and being able to trickle it down to a root cause so we can help the whole community. So again, I appreciate that. It's not just about the police, but the whole community. So
Yeah, I know.
we know we need housing. We've had that conversation. Again, we've not gotten to supporting seniors in our community yet, which we'll get there. So I just think it tells kind of what we're all dealing with in the community already.
Yeah, certainly in his situation, if, well, actually, West Central requires us to bring him to the hospital to be cleared prior to being incarcerated. So he is seen by a medical professional before he is incarcerated.
Is he seen, but he's not seen by a psychiatric?
He could be, he may be. It just varies upon what's being reported at the hospital. If he was being reported as suicidal, which I believe this gentleman has in the past, you know, he would definitely be seen by a psychological professional, and possibly pink slip.
We don't have day breaks, Monday programs. We don't have interventions. We have West Central and the STAR program. Yeah. So
Well, and you know, the argument here, according to this report, if I remember correctly, started because he wanted to go somewhere and spend the night overnight, and mom said, or grandma said, you have some chores to do. And he said it wasn't fair because the sister doesn't have to do any chores. And that's basically what the argument started as, and it escalated.
So Sean, in that 17% number, could that be multiple interactions with the same individual?
Yes, it could be.
Is that what you said?
Yes, it could also be, you know, so my report documented incidents of use of force. So rarely do we use force by ourselves. We don't, when we make an arrest, any domestic violence call we go on to, we're always sending 2 officers. So at the very least, most of our arrests have 2 officers. Now, occasionally an officer does have to use force by himself, but if somebody is acting like they might not comply or submit to an arrest voluntarily, you know, we try to get back up there before we actually try to do the arrest. Sometimes that is our way of hopefully de-escalating the situation, is by showing the use of force. So if I show up by myself and I'm trying to arrest somebody that's really tall and muscular, he might think he can take me, and it's going to result in a use of force. If I can get 2-3 officers there as backup, he might change his mind. And so if I've got the time and the distance and don't have to approach him and tell him he's under arrest until my backup gets there, I'm going to wait till my backup gets there. But then, you know, these numbers, the other thing that these numbers will reflect is sometimes we arrest more than one person, or sometimes we use force than more than one person in one specific incident. So if I stop a car that is stolen and I have 3 people in the car, we do what's called a felony stop. When the car stops in front of us, we order people out of the car with our guns drawn to come back to us. And if there's 3 people in that car, that's 3 uses of 3 people that I've counted in this report of that race that were in that car that force was used against. So if it was 3 black males in that car, I've counted 3 black males.
and you identify them, right? It's not like you ask them, what do they identify with? 'Cause there are some mixed people that actually don't identify, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so
You know, that varies from officer to officer and person to person. You know, I've gone to trainings that have said that, you know, you should, on a bias-based or a racial profiling statistic, you should ask the person what race do you identify with? And then mark the box. And then I've been training where I've been told that if you're going to discriminate against somebody based upon race, you're going to discriminate against them based upon the race that they think that you think they are. So the officer should record what race they think the person is. So because we've had differing opinions, there's no real standard.
If you have someone that you are telling to stop and they refuse to stop and start walking away from you, or, you know, no movement, no weapons, what is your technique then?
Well, you know, I guess it depends on what stage we're at in that interaction. If it's a consensual interaction and you walk away from me, if I'm walking down Main Street and I walk up to you and I say, "Hi, how's it going?" and you just walk away from me, I'm not going after you. If I'm investigating a complaint and you've been identified as a suspect in that complaint, you can't walk away from it.
Or they look like the person that you think is, or description matches.
Correct. So they've been identified as a suspect in that complaint.
Okay, and they walk away from you.
Well, they don't have the right to at that point. So, you know, it could be as simple as matching a description, or it could be as simple as, you know, your spouse is saying that, you know, my husband hit me, and you're investigating a domestic violence and you know that's their spouse. They can't just walk away from it.
But what if they do? What if
they do? Well, you know, if there's no weapons displayed, it's going to be a hands-on technique at first. You know, it may be well, I mean, to go back even before that, it's going to be warnings. Hey, come back. You know, you can't walk away from me. Maybe even walking with them for some time to try to stop them. If they refuse to stop or start running, we're going to give chase or try to grab a hold of them. If they continue to struggle and don't stop, they're probably going to have handcuffs put on. So until if they're told they're under arrest, now if we have enough information at a point to place them under arrest, then they definitely can't walk around. So you've kind of got like 3 different levels there. You've got the consensual encounter, you've got the investigation, and you've got the person that's been told that they're under arrest.
Hey, Sean, if I could ask, you were saying that the officer would write down the race of the individual, but isn't that typically on a driver's license? So why would that be written down by the
No, it's not your race. It's not on your driver's license.
on there?
Back in the day, I remember like,
I don't think it's ever been on
Never,
there.
You're right.
you're right, we're all pulling it out like the cheap. Like, you never know when you, I'm sorry. Thank you, Sheree, for reminding us. Thank you.
Yeah, I was looking at my hair color all these years.
Oh, yeah. I didn't think that until I reacted.
Changed to skin color, I guess, when it's all gone. But anyway.
Any other questions about the use of force?
No, I just like to ask about, so you were saying that there's use of force and then there's another type of force being used, right? What's the other name called, please? Not, you were saying that there's a use of force and then there's a different type of force. You're saying that the use of force is mild, then there's another one that's a little more severe.
Use of deadly force?
No, I thought you mentioned that there was 2
Or
categories.
just displaying a weapon, which we track whenever we display a weapon. So if I display a taser or a firearm at somebody, then we're tracking that, and that's included in these numbers. So displaying of a weapon and actually using force.
Gotcha.
So, before we do move on though, in the 66%, do you see a strong trend again in mental health?
I haven't specifically tracked that in my last report,
If there's any.
and I haven't corresponded homelessness with that. I did correspond to level of criminal charge, 41% of our uses of force were for felony charges, 43% were misdemeanor charges, and 16% no criminal charges were filed. And so those are usually mental health things. And as I went through this in January of 2019, I noticed that most of those people that in that 16% were transported to a hospital. So force was used and they were transported to a mental health facility for evaluation. Pink slips or suicide attempts.
I just wondered, does the city of Troy have a statistician that reviews a lot of?
Right. That's what I'm like, we need to go.
No, because obviously there's a lot of reports out there, so, and this would require someone that is actually specialized in looking at different statistics or anything, so.
Is that our community health assessment?
No, you're asking for,
Yeah.
you're asking for a statistician who works for the city that just crunches the numbers and looks for trends.
Yeah.
Now, that's something that the supervision at the police department does, since
Sounds like-
they review all of the reports and they're gathering all the data. I think, Sean, isn't it typically the
Patrol captain does use, different reports are assigned to different people.
Yeah, we don't have a dedicated position.
But when he sees trends, you guys obviously sit down and talk about how we can.
Some of the other things that I think I already talked about in shift. When it comes to actual uses of force and not display of weapons, there were 20 on midnight shift, 16 on second shift, which is 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., and 13 on day shift, and 1 at a special event, and that was at Hobart Arena. Days of the week, Friday leads the number with 16 uses of force occurred on a Friday. To break down when the firearms were displayed, 20 incidents, only a firearm displayed. We had 0 firearms discharged. We discharged the taser 3 times in 2019. I'll take that back. We did not use the taser only in a drive stun at all in 2019. We displayed the taser twice. We never used our ask in 2019 against a person. We never used pepper spray against a person in 2019. We used weaponless techniques or hands-on techniques in 39 of those incidents. And in 10 incidents, we used multiple methods, and I broke those down. 4 of them were taser and hands-on. 3 of them were firearms displayed, and then we went hands-on. 1 was a taser was deployed, and then they tried to drive stun the person. 1 was the taser probes were deployed, and then they went hands-on. And then 1 was the taser, they tried to drive stun, and then they went hands-on. I see it.
Anybody die last year?
No one was killed or shot at. Like I said, we never fired our weapons in 2019. Last time we fired our weapons, I think in Troy was 2013. No, it was the incident on Mayfield, and he survived. The subject that was coming in officer short with a knife.
And again, I'm asking you, you might not know it's okay, but out of the legal force, let's say since you've been there, can you just guesstimate black versus white or Chinese or ethnic? Is it?
In my 25 career, we've had 3 incidents where we've used firearms, and they've all been against black males in the city.
Really? Thank you for being honest. Honestly, I mean, it's a tough thing.
It's not
It's
chicken
the
with it
truth. It's the truth. I mean,
I think with that one, it was, one of those 3 was not a resident. He was sober. The other one was a mentally ill situation, and the third was highly intoxicated and possibly on drugs.
And it already shot 1 person.
And already shot another person.
That was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I already talked about drug and alcohol use, the amount of injuries reported by the subjects after we use force against them. Like I said, 80% were not injured, 20% were injured. At least one officer was injured in 5% of the use of force incidents that we had, and 95% an officer was not injured. We tracked what's called the type of resistance. We categorize type of resistance into, and these are state terms: passive, low level active, and aggressive active. Passive is basically I'm just not following commands. Low level active, I'm walking away from you, and aggressive active would be is I'm actually swinging my fist at you, striking you, or actively trying to pull away from you and get away. In 16% of the calls, the type of resistance was passive. 36% of the calls, 36% was passive. Low level active 48% and aggressive active 16% of the calls. So we are very specific about, just putting the handcuffs on somebody or just escorting somebody is not necessarily a use of force. But when people try to pull away from us, when they lock their arms in front of them and refuse to put them behind their back, if we have to grab their arms and pull them back behind them, we would consider that a use of force. One of the things we teach our officers is that you never get in trouble for doing a report. So we would rather have our officers fill out a report and report that use of force, because the opposite end of the spectrum is if you don't do a report, you should have done a report, you very well might be in trouble. So, I mean, that's kind of, it's been instilled in me since I've got there.
So I was gonna ask that question in regard, it's kind of like integrity, right? So if someone does pull their weapon or use that type of use of force by putting it on, and they do not file the report, it's really going back to their integrity, correct?
Right. And, you would hope that if that happened with two officers present, it would be even less likely that somebody would not file the report. And the more officers you have, the less likely somebody would try to cover that up. And then I guess we're pretty much reliant on, somebody coming in to complain. If, an officer used force and a report wasn't generated. I guess there's other ways we could find out if for some reason we were reviewing video, which we do on occasion, and we found the use of force on somebody's video and saw that there was use of force not reported, that would be an issue. Witnesses could report it, it just, yeah. Which leads me into my next topic, which would be our complaint procedures. Basically, we'll take a complaint from anybody at any place at any time through any method. Our policy is to investigate all complaints, including anonymous. However, an anonymous complaint makes it a little bit harder to investigate it, especially if it's, somebody's word against somebody else's word, and you talk to the officer and they say, no, it didn't happen. And then you've got no one to go back and question further or see if there's any additional proof. But generally, lower level complaints that might be minor discipline are handled by the sergeant or a captain. Higher level complaints, like an excessive use of force, would be handled by our internal affairs process. Now that internal affairs process is assigned by me, the chief of police. Our general internal affairs investigator is our detective captain, which is Captain Kunkelman. So he would usually be assigned. Now, if there was some kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? If there was some kind of, if he was involved in it somehow, obviously me as chief of police could not assign him to do the internal affairs investigation. We have gone to outside agencies before to ask them to do internal affairs investigations. All 3 officer-involved shootings in my 25-year career here, we have asked the Bureau, BCI, Ohio BCI, to come in and investigate those. We have not done those internal investigations ourselves. When there's a shooting, there's automatically an internal investigation and a criminal investigation into the officer's conduct.
And I assume officers have to go to therapy and stuff like that, or?
They're encouraged to see a psychologist. They are not required to.
Do you think there ever might be a possibility to consider adding on the budget sometime where you have 2 to 3 sessions out of a year where you have like a DHD, behavioral mental health prevention program, where someone comes in with large groups of like 10 and just have an opportunity for people to talk and kind of get that outer group perspective of what it's like to have a therapist and express those feelings.
So, you know, Tri-County Health, with their training about the self-care and their services they offer, has done a very good job of reaching out to us and offering us that. Every year they host a officer mental health awareness day for the past couple of years, where they've talked to us. They also, if there's any traumatic event that occurs, they will offer to us a debriefing if we want it. And it's voluntary if officers want to debrief with this traumatic event. This year, Tri-County Mental Health is offering a program that our sheriff had found out of Michigan, and Tri-County Mental Health is offering us scholarships to go to a more inclusive type of training, where it's a self-assessment tool that I believe that the officers are going to complete, and then after they complete that self-assessment tool, then they're going to have counseling sessions based upon that. And from my understanding of the program, which I'm signed up to do, I think Sergeant Syrian is, I took, I think, a total of 6 or 7 volunteers because of the amount of scholarships were limited through the Tri-County area, so I didn't want to take all the positions. But it's going to be several sessions, and it's going to be more about, okay, well, you might not be suffering from this right now, but based upon your self-assessment, these are your tendencies, so you might want to watch out for these kind of things. Or they might say, you know, hey, you might have a problem here. You might want to think about this and get some help.
So I think it's required that someone needs to do it.
At what point is it required? If we felt that an officer was no longer fit for duty and had, you know, some evidence of that, I could send an officer to a fitness for duty, and that would be psychological or it could be medical.
Oh, were you gonna say something?
I'm just gonna add to what Chief was saying, that the one time it is also required, prior to coming back to duty from the use of a deadly force incident, it's required that they see a psychologist or psychiatrist prior to being cleared for duty to come back. I believe that's correct.
It's recommended.
Recommended?
It's recommended, it's not required.
Okay.
I can't force them at that.
Oh, misspoke. Outside of that, it's up to them for any additional therapy session.
So, union, okay.
So the union,
Yeah, I asked could he require it, and he said that it's a union thing, that's the barrier for that. In regards to, and again, I don't want to discriminate against mental health, but I'm curious, like, if an officer has a PTSD diagnosis, does that preclude you from being a street officer? Does that mean that you need to, like, what do you do if you end up with PTSD?
Well, I think we would have to go back to the fitness for duty exam. Like I said,
Okay.
you know, if I had a reason to believe that that officer should not come back to work, so, but I would have to be able to put that in writing. It couldn't just be a feeling or a hunch.
Okay.
But I would have to, you know, actually, I can order that fitness for duty, but I have to have a reason to do it. It can't just be based upon.
So I wonder, like, do officers, again, like, because you've been one for 25 years, and Joel, like, is there fear? If I had PTSD, like, you know what I mean? Am I gonna be able to go to work? Like, is there a stigma there for police? Like,
You know, I guess there's a stigma there for maybe men in general to admit that they're suffering
Right.
from any kind of mental illness. But, you know, if you're able to come in and do the job and you're seeking treatment and that treatment seems to be working, then, you know, we're probably going to let you to continue to be an officer. And the officers get sick time and, you know, they can request a leave of absence and things like that. You know, I do know that.
maybe partners, or could they just be alone, or?
Yeah, yeah, certainly we have done that before in the past, where we've done kind of an additional field training program where it's like, okay, you know, you might have been out of the office for 6 months because you were involved in a shooting. We want you to ride with another officer for a few weeks here before we release you on your own again. And we have done that in the past.
And I can see, Sonny, where in one of those deadly force, fortunately for our city, rare
Yeah.
situations that we had where an officer did get some extended therapy time. Outside of stigma, there wasn't any. I think there was a lot of support among his coworkers and the line officers at the time that are understandable of that, because fortunately in our city it is rare.
Yeah.
And it is very shocking. Even I have the radio traffic from the first one to this day, and I was there about 4 seconds into it, and it's still very unnerving. And that was seven years ago. And it was there just immediately after. So let alone be the officer that takes part in that. He got some extra that he asked for, and there was a lot of support by his partners for that. So I didn't see any negative feedback or hear any negative feedback from coworkers regarding it. That's a great job. You need to get what you need to do, then you need to do that. And there was a lot of support.
Yeah, that's really good to know. I mean, even in the 17%, you know, like men, like you said in general, now you put diversity in men, like, are they going to get therapy? Do they know? Is it a qualifying? Is it a financial barrier? Again, like, I can see all these trends that keep popping up in my head, so thank you for that.
I do know that there was a sheriff's deputy that went out on a disability after an officer involved shooting several years ago. So, you know, it is a possibility. You know, if you're involved in something like that and you decide you can no longer be an officer, you know, you can follow that route.
My only thing is this always sounds like based on if there's a situation, you know, what steps you take. It's a high stress job, right? All the time. And I mean, do you see any benefit in having something in the future for prevention? You know, how to handle these situations before you get to that situation? And, you know, like you said, does it cover some of your training hours, right?
Yeah, I think that's included in some of that training and in some of our thought processes, especially back in the police academy, when you think about, you know, okay, you know, you may be called upon in your career at some point to use deadly force, and how are you going to feel about that? There's a lot of discussions in different, you know, police self-defense courses and stuff about that, about your mental status when you're confronted with those high stress, deadly conditions where, you know you're going to get tunnel vision. I mean, and the training is you've got to train, because you're going to react like this, to look left and look right, because if you don't, you're going to miss something standing right next to you. You know, understanding it, practicing it, is what's hopefully going to assist you in doing the right thing when you're confronted with that stressful situation.
I don't know exactly where our box is, you know, but I think it would be really great. You know, HRC is Human Relations Commission. It doesn't have a specific race that we're technically focusing on, or even race in general. I mean, police are humans as well. I think it would be really great if the HRC would look into some sort of coalition of fundraising of outside sources to maybe fundraise for someone to come in for not just our police officers, but our firefighters as well, and maybe some of our local medics as well, and have that accessible for you, and see how we can get requirements to meet state mandates for it to cover training hours.
So, I mean, we're kind of doing this with this program specific that the sheriff likes, to see if we like it and get some feedback, so maybe we can get some buy-in and send additional officers. Obviously, that's dependent upon training funds and dependent upon if Tri-County Mental Health offers more scholarships. So, you know, this is kind of a starting spot for me as far as introducing more officer health and wellness into our training program. But Tri-County Health has really been a lead to help us with that.
So, does the police department participate in lunch buddies? Is it just a volunteer, or do you have so many officers?
Yeah, we don't have anything official, but, you know, there's been a couple officers who have volunteered, and we've allowed them to do that on their lunch break to go do their lunch buddies.
Food for thought, looking officers with the 17% of little black boys.
Use my lunch.
Might be a beautiful thing for the future. I'm just saying, you know, like, maybe if that's something that, you know, once you guys have time and more structure, maybe more people would want to. 'Cause I have a couple clients that kids said that they had a lunch buddy and it was an officer, and the way that they view it's totally different than the kid that just had, you know, a random lunch buddy. So it might be a way to build relationships. And Garden Manor, if you know, we wanna talk about that in the future, maybe we'll start with the kids out there. or something like that.
Well, but keep in mind that we can't force anybody, it doesn't matter what employee
Oh,
group they
yeah.
are, because, you know, you get what you pay for, basically. If you force somebody to do it, they don't want to do it,
Right.
that interaction is going to be negative. What we try to do is make the culture and the atmosphere and the environment such that they know that if they're interested in doing this, we'll be flexible and let them pursue that, because we know that that's, like you said, it's a benefit to everybody.
Yeah, and that is the best way to do it, to not force it.
And the same goes with mental health training. I know that the sheriff has said that he's got some people that don't want to do it. I've been told that he has decided that he's not going to make them participate, but he's going to at least make them attempt at this point, because of he believes in this program so much.
That's Randy,
But,
right?
yeah,
Is it Randy Slusher that's doing that training for the sheriff?
Oh, no, that's, he's doing your training. This is a company out of Michigan that offers mental health
Oh,
training.
okay, gotcha.
So, this is an outside company. Our complaints have 5 different conclusions of fact. Those conclusions of fact are that the complaint was proper conduct, improper conduct, policy failure, insufficient evidence, or unfounded. We don't necessarily track race in those complaints. And the only way I would know on the complaint form that we fill out that race was an issue if the complaint was specifically about race. In 2019, we documented 4 formal complaints. In 2020 to date, I've documented 8 formal complaints. I believe the numbers are up a little bit because I have placed as both patrol captain and now as the chief, an emphasis on actually documenting these complaints. In the past, if you called in a complaint to the sergeant on midnight shift and the sergeant thought you were full of it, it'd tell you to put it somewhere and that would be the end of it. We're talking 20 years ago.
Everybody's looking at Joel.
Yeah.
Before me.
Like Patrick said before me too. Huh?
I've now put an emphasis on documenting those complaints, quite frankly, because of when, as a CALIA manager, as an accreditation manager, when I went to our assessors and said, yeah, we didn't have any complaints that year. And they look at me like, really? Because you're not doing your job if you don't get complained on in this business. So the 2019 complaints, those 4 formal complaints, 3 were related to use of force. 2 were unfounded, 1 was improper. 1 we found against the officer and found it was improper conduct, and 1 we felt that was insufficient evidence. None of them included race. The 8 formal complaints in 2020, there was 1 complaint that race was a factor, 0 were related to use of force, 4 were unfounded, 3 were proper conduct, and 1 was insufficient evidence. You know what? We're not in the business of making people happy. You know, a lot of times we go out and calls and it's a neighbor dispute and both neighbors want the other person arrested and we don't arrest either of them and both of them are mad when we leave. So, you know, and one of the complaints from 2020 could be classified as that. It is, and I don't know why it is, 2 of the complaints in 2020 have involved the McDonald's drive-thru and the line there
Slow.
and getting in line and people cutting in line.
Oh my God, people were like, hold please.
Well, no, they get out of their cars and they start yelling and fighting with each other and then they
My
call
big
the
man.
police.
It's
It's
not
that
road
stupid
rage,
2 lane that they got, because people think they cut
I've
in
been cut.
that
I've been pretty mad. Get my chicken nuggets anyways.
Or whether it's ridiculous or serious,
Yeah, they
you
gotta
write
do
it
it
down
down.
and it becomes a statistic.
Yeah.
He got
That's why you gotta look behind the
it.
numbers.
She got us. That's not a static.
My instructions to my sergeants is that they have the ability to decide whether or not it's a complaint or it's not a complaint. I fielded what was a complaint earlier this year as chief of police that I didn't feel was a complaint that needed to be documented because it was just a misunderstanding. And I might have already shared this story. The gentleman called and he was upset because we didn't run lights and sirens to his daughter's traffic crash. And when I explained to him that we don't run lights and sirens to non-injury traffic crashes, and he said, oh yeah, we reported to 911 that no one was injured. It's not a complaint. It's just a clarification of our policies and procedures. So our sergeants field a lot of questions like that. And so it is their judgment on whether or not this is a complaint that needs documented. If it's a serious offense, obviously they need to forward it up the chain of command and make it an internal affairs. It would become an internal affairs investigation. Or if they just answer the questions, and that's the end of it. Internal affairs complaints are fairly rare. We had one in 2019. I don't think we had any in 2018, and we haven't had any in 2020. Or no, there was one in 2020, and that was against me.
All that to make sure you were cheap or something? Oh, sorry.
That was for what happened on the
Lord
side.
have mercy. I know it's late. Sorry.
Seems like the last year.
I did add, and this might be backtracking a little bit, mental health exams may be required by the city under Article 17 of the union agreements, but that's a fitness for duty. So I can require it, but I have to have, I think, a reason to require it. I can't just say you were involved in a shooting, you need to go. And the next bullet is, it's highly encouraged by policy after an incident that causes death of another person or serious physical harm. And I believe the incidents, I want to say everybody participated in 3 incidents in my career. Everybody that was involved wanted to go at least talk at an initial psychologist, initially. And then one gentleman decided to do some follow-up.
And I can tell you, having been here for at least 2 of those instances, maybe, while they might have felt like they volunteered, they were strongly encouraged to do that at least once, just so everybody knew the state of mind. Because prior to that, it was how many years since they had something like that happen. And I don't think either one of these officers had ever experienced anything like that. That is an option as well. So when Sean says, the union contract says we can do that, sometimes Sean may, Sean's predecessor, he may or may not have wanted to push the envelope, but between Tom and me, we might want to push a little harder. And it's all for, everybody's best benefit, it's not a punishment for the officer. We don't want to make it that way. We just want to make sure that they're ready to come back for their sake as well as the communities.
Moving on with some of our policies, we do have a policy against racial profiling. Traffic stops are tracked annually, and I think you've seen some of those reports, and we've discussed those.
Is it not racial profile or?
It's a little more involved than that, but yeah, basically you can sum it up that way. For some reason, Kalia, and I've been corrected 100 times when I call it racial profiling, because everybody calls it racial profiling. Kalia calls it bias-based profiling. And it's just,
You didn't say that because it could be more than race.
right. As far as tracking the race of physical arrest and breaking it down by officer, we have never done that. Is it in the computer system, the race of everybody we arrest? Yes, it's in there. It becomes complicated, and I've tried to look into it a few times because I've never tried to break it down by officer, but I've tried to break it down by the entire department before. And because there's so many moving parts, if I arrest somebody for domestic, there's always 2 officers there. So what officer arrested that person? It's hard to delineate. And then if I count 2 officers, my numbers are going to be huge. If I arrest a person for OVI, most of our OVI arrests, after we ask them to provide a breath or blood sample or urine sample, they're released to a sober friend. Or somebody will come pick them up. So even though we've created a physical arrest, the way our computer system shows it is that was a summons. Several times we'll put handcuffs on people, and then we'll issue them a summons and release them. In the example of somebody that wants to walk away, if after the investigation concludes that, well, you just deserve a ticket for this, and they didn't fight with us or anything like that. I've actually seen where we've issued tickets for resisting arrest.
Can you see like, so I have heard a lot of stories, for example, of traffic stops, but people getting breaks. And then I hear the same incident and someone like going to jail, getting in trouble. And you see like kind of the equality, it's probably a hard word to say when it's policing, but does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, why is it if I leave Mojo's, I don't have a DUI, somebody got to pick me up, I leave the brewery, I'm going to jail, things like that. Like, are you able to kind of discern?
Well, you know, we teach our officers to make that decision and decide on using their discretion based upon the actions of the person. And so, you know, the easiest example that I like to use is we give general guidelines that if you're doing 0 to 10 over, you should get a warning. 10 to 15, you're supposed to take into account road conditions and the amount of traffic and the width of the roadway and things like that. And so it's kind of a gray area between 10 to 15 miles an hour. 15 miles per hour and over, generally you're supposed to issue a citation. However, I might be the person that if I stop you for doing 15 over and you've got a screaming child in the seat because you're rushing to the hospital, I'm just going to say, go, see you later, and let them get that child to the hospital.
But what if the next person pulls up in the same situation, but like, I need to get my MF child to the hospital, like, what are you doing? Where I'm from.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, like, can you see the difference? Because if we're not bias-based, like, that's kind of hard, right? Like, how do you determine?
Well,
that you're not
that's
being
why we
bias-based?
train people in different kinds of tactical communication so that they maybe understand that the person driving doesn't really mean anything about it, and,
Okay.
and they're going to base the decision on the actions and hopefully, any circumstances surrounding
So
that.
we're gonna get better.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So, but attitude plays a role in it. We're humans, and you know what? If I stop you for speeding and you say, I'm sorry, I'm in a hurry, I've had a bad day, my parents are sick with the coronavirus and it's just been awful, I got fired from my job, it's hard to give that person a ticket. But then if you stop somebody and the first words out of their mouth are F you, and they just start going off, it's a lot easier to give that person a ticket because we're human.
I'm gonna hook it up. We're gonna hook it up. We're gonna train it down.
So, you try not to do that, and you train people not to do that, but in the end, we're all human. And I think anybody who's ever worked in customer service could probably attest to the quality of service that they give a person if the person's treating them well or if the person's treating them bad.
Customer's always right.
Customer's always right.
I was going to discuss the fire department does not use ketamine. I actually never heard of this ketamine use until it was brought up on one of the forums that the Human Relations Council brought up. I had to kind of research what it was about, and no. I call it a horse tranquilizer, I think, or it's basically, from what I understand, is that sometimes paramedics will carry it in bigger cities, or maybe even not bigger cities, and then police officers may urge those paramedics to use the ketamine to calm somebody down.
Sonia, that was that young boy who was, I don't know, 14, I don't remember, had headphones on, and he was going to go get soda for his brother, and he's dancing around, and the cops thought there was something going on, so they calmed him down.
Colorado, right?
Yeah.
Aurora,
And
Colorado.
and it killed him.
Yeah, it's an antipsychotic.
You should be up never mind.
Now, I have seen the hospital sedate people after we've gotten them in there, but it's always been in the hospital setting, and never I've never asked it. It's been like, oh, he's quiet now. What happened? Oh, we gave him something.
Usually it's Ativan or something.
Drug testing for police officers. It's covered in Article 38 of the union contracts. We do not have random drug testing. I have to have reasonable suspicion that an officer is using something. Some of those things could be odor, their behavior, if they were in a crash, or an on-duty incident resulting in severe bodily injury or deadly force. Yes, yes, that is in the contract.
Do we need to talk to the union?
You know, we had, the only time I've had to personally use it is we had an off-duty officer involved in an accident. That officer came to me and said, I think I killed the kid. The kid darted out in front of him. And luckily the kid was treated and released. He wasn't hurt at all. I mean, it's amazing how kids can bounce off pavement. But, but, you know, I asked him to, because of, I mean, regardless of if he would have been an officer or not, I would have asked him, since he said that he thought it might be a fatal accident. Any fatal accident, I'm going to try to get a drug test from the driver that we consider involved, just to find out. And that's the only incident I've ever asked for a drug test, and he was off duty.
And our city policy is when any employee is involved in an on duty or during work accident, we do require testing. We have
For the CDLs.
the CDLs in particular, but we expanded beyond that. But I can't remember where we go.
Yeah, I think we just probably ask UVMC to do it. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of our community relation programs we have. We don't have a lot of these down in writing. We just kind of do them.
So those are policies that you're going to be implementing, or were you just reviewing?
The drug testing, no, that's already in place. The drug testing is a part of the collective bargaining agreement.
Okay.
So,
Are there any other policies you're looking over to add,
as far as drug usage,
or any policies?
well, you know, actually, we're reviewing a lot of policies right now. That is a major undertaking. You know, there's 400 some odd 480 standards that are given to us through CALIA, and our policy manual CALIA gives us kind of an outline for our policy manual. A lot of those policies haven't been updated in quite a long time. As an accreditation manager, those are near and dear to my heart, and there's some of them I fought to change for a while, and just, you know, we were unable to come up to the compromise with the former administration because they like the old. So now that I'm the chief, I think I'm going to implement some of those changes. There's also a major revision that has occurred with the CALIA standards from version 5.23 to version 6, when they change the big number when it's a major revision. They're now on 6.10. And they started on 6.01. So with our last accreditation, we have to move from version 5.23 to 6.10. I know that a couple conferences ago, there were some changes that involved the LGBTQT community. Did I say that right? That we have to maybe make some additions to and review. So, I mean, basically, as a new chief, I'm slowly working on trying to go through almost our entire policy.
Sean, is that implementing the hate laws or, yeah?
De-escalation.
For the LGBTQ.
I don't necessarily know if it's that. I know some of it has to do with wording. I know some of it has to do with incarceration and where you house people depending on their gender versus their sex. But my understanding from that is that state law trumps accreditation. State law says that, and we don't house people anyways, but I believe state law says you are incarcerated based upon your sex, not your gender. And I think CALIA sees it the opposite way, and they want you housed based upon your gender. Yeah. Yeah, so in that case, like, since we don't run a jail, it doesn't really apply to us, but some of the other things like transporting people, we're not supposed to transport a male and female together in the same car or put them in the same cell, because we do have the temporary holding cells, and so we never put a male and female in there together. We usually try not to put two people in one cell anyways, because of our holding facility is not used very often. It's basically just used to fingerprint and photograph people, or process the OBIs, and then we transport them to the jail. But those are one of the changes, that needs to be made. The de-escalation techniques need added to our uses of force, and I need to review those. We added the duty to intervene, we added the choke holds, we added the vascular neck restraints. I definitely need to work on our complaint procedure. There's some changes I know I want to make in our complaint procedures. There's other things that are going to sneak up on us. I know I need to add a firearms range, because we do have a firearms range safety policy. We currently don't have one. I know version 6 requires us to have one. We have to add a policy that specifies how we handle an officer involved shooting. I think it might already be addressed in a different chapter, but this is a new chapter that is specific to a procedure dealing with that. So I think we might have to expand on that a little bit more, because of the standard has more requirements than what it used to. So, it's a huge undertaking. I'm wanting a little more help on that. I'm still listed as the accreditation manager of record with our accrediting body. I'm working on trying to get a new accreditation manager in there, but they need to be trained and up to speed to do that. And I hope that he can dedicate more time than I can as chief.
He or she.
He or she, yeah.
What policies are you going to look at to implement when body cameras are implemented?
That's one that we're currently working on. We've got a model policy from the International Associations of Chief of Police that we're kind of basing it on, and we're in the process of looking at that. My administrative captain, Captain Ryan Ornberg, is actually working on it right now.
And it'll contain things like cameras need to be on any stops made or any search.
Yeah, we don't usually reinvent the wheel. We usually steal from other companies or other agencies to figure it out, especially, because we're an Ohio agency and we're CLIA certified. That's usually where we go first to steal from. But there's other resources like the International Association of Chiefs of Police. The Ohio Collaborative has model policies out there, which we are collaborative certified too. So we try to piece stuff together, find what works best for us in Troy, Ohio, and release the policy.
And we don't do no-knock warrants, right?
No-knock warrants are legal in Ohio.
They're illegal?
Legal.
Yes,
No, I'm
yes, we
asking
do.
him
We do.
if
I
we do
can't,
here.
we have, I can't recall ever doing one here, but we have potential to do one.
Would you be open to possibly getting rid of those, considering what happened to Breonna Taylor?
Would you at least review the Breonna Taylor's law and see if there's anything in that you can implement? This isn't a recommendation. If this is something that you've thought about looking at or might.
I have not. I just watched a CALIA webinar today that discussed a policy, a model policy regarding no-knock warrants. I believe they're an important tool for officer safety, in rare circumstances. So, and I think in Troy, we've shown that they're very rare. And like I said, I can't recall our detectives ever doing one, and that's who would do it in Troy. A lot of it is to prevent the destruction of evidence, and a lot of it is to try to, if you have weapons, if you have knowledge you have weapons in the house, is to prevent the people inside the house from gaining access to those weapons. So to a certain extent, I'd say no-knock warrant helps prevent the use of force. The standard for a no-knock warrant, the courts, from what I understand in Ohio, is pretty high. And you at least, you announce yourself. It might just be, you announce as the door's coming in, but they're extremely rare in Troy.
Do you have to get a judge's order and supply sufficient evidence that the no-knock warrant can be implemented?
Yeah, it's from, and I wasn't a detective and I've never applied for a no-knock warrant. So I'm not exactly sure about the process, but my understanding is that, you know, first you're going to request a search warrant, and then if the search warrant is granted, the no knock is an additional hurdle you have to get over with the judge to say, this is why I need a no knock warrant. And the judge makes that decision.
There's other communities that have gone away from no knock. Like there's been some states I believe that have said basically we're not going to allow this to happen after the incident in Louisville, Kentucky. And so there's like other means, like you could fly a drone over, you know, property, and as soon as that person leaves, then the police would come arrest, right? You know, a drone can fly at 5,000 feet where they, you know, the person outside wouldn't even see it. So I think that there's things like that that are being looked at and implemented so that we don't have issues like what happened in Louisville, Kentucky.
And certainly if state law changed, or if our accrediting body said, you know, these are the requirements. Currently there's no knock warrant in our accreditation. Accreditation doesn't address it. So, you know, certainly we'll fall into compliance with state law, local law, or accreditation.
And the one in Louisville, Kentucky, that was implemented by the local government, not by the police officers themselves. It was voted on by the city council. And we do have a wonderful drone, I will say. That had beautiful shots. But I mean, I think the biggest concern is it's not just Breonna Taylor, right? That officer did get shot and hit in one of his main arteries, so it is dangerous for both parties.
Yeah. So, but like I said, I mean, they're extremely rare in Troy, Ohio. So, but is it a tool we might want to hold on to use in those circumstances where it might be called for? No. I can see a need for it. Our community relations program, we've had an auxiliary, a long-standing auxiliary. We only have 8 auxiliary officers. We can have up to 25. They are uniformed, but they are not sworn. In the past, it's been an excellent springboard for people that want to become police officers to join our auxiliary. We get to know them. They take the civil service test, and we already know them. And so the interview, background check, if they pass everything, you know, we know if we want them or not, if we think that they're a good fit for our police department. Unfortunately, I think a lot of this has to do with just volunteership in the community in general. We're down to 8 officers. When I first got hired, there was a core group of older, almost retired gentlemen that just wanted to help the police. And there was a younger group of people that wanted to become police officers. And they were very active. They did a lot. They actually organized our National Night Out. Over the course of the years, because of some retirements or for people getting older, younger officers moving on and trying to get that, it's kind of at a low point right now. And we'd like to see that built back up again and use that as a recruiting tool again, and to have those volunteers to help out. They're not allowed to make arrests. They're not allowed to, they don't carry weapons or anything like, well, they carry non-lethal weapons. They're not allowed to carry a gun or a shotgun or a rifle. But it definitely has its benefits. We've used them to direct traffic, to block intersections. We've used them at community events to talk to the public, and we used to use them at Hobart Arena for some security there to augment our security. So it's a decent program, but it's been difficult to keep active with a lot of people. Our DARE and school resource officers, we have the 3 DARE officers, or SROs that teach DARE, the DARE program in both the elementary school and the junior high school. They also provide several different summer programs like Safety Town that a lot of people are familiar with. Any graduates of Safety Town?
Right.
I know people my age that went to Safety Town.
I think our replacing DARE since studies have shown that it's not really effective.
It's a
Only
good.
because our DARE program, our DARE officers are also SRO officers, so they You know, they do double duty.
So they're kind of revamping the way that like do relationships with the
I think
kids.
we've modified the curriculum there along the way. But we have not eliminated it because it does serve that other purpose, which is the SRO, which is a great.
Right.
The,
Okay.
the original DARE program that has been studied and found to not be effective for drug use has been revamped. I think that the DARE organization looked at that and made a lot of changes. It's more geared on decision making and making positive decisions than just being a anti-drug campaign. So they've really changed the program. I'm not 100%, familiar with it. I can bring in a DARE officer to talk to you about what it all entails, and or Captain Compliment.
Well, my daughter was on Zoom, and I believe it was, I don't remember what class, but it had nothing to do with like drugs, right? But the officer came in, it was silly, and I think he was talking about different personalities and kind of like maybe the criminal mindset or whatnot. But I thought that was really cool that it wasn't just that standard, talk that they had. So I can see that they're integrating themselves in other classes in the school.
Right. And I think that's kind of up to the individual teachers in the classroom. I know Officer Tilley goes into most of the health department classes. So we're in front of, Captain Compliment's goal has to be in front of the kids at least once per year in every grade. So I know Detective Tilley tries to teach that health class every year. I don't think it's very long. I think it might just be one day. But he does talk about traffic stops. He brings in the OBI goggles that I guess have been a big hit, unfortunately, due to the coronavirus. It hasn't been done this year. So, we try to get in front of somebody every year. I know we've gone in front of like physics classes to talk about traffic crashes with some of our accident reconstructionists, and that might not necessarily be a school resource officer.
It was chemistry.
Was it
I
chemistry?
think he was talking about obviously drugs.
Yeah. And so, we're kind of dependent on the individual teachers asking the SRO to come in and teach specific courses too.
That's a really good thing though.
They offer a bike camp, usually at least 2 bike camps, a beginners and a advanced bike camp during the summer. They also have a CSI camp that we do 2 weeks. I think this year, because of the coronavirus, the turnout was pretty low, but I think we've offered 4 different classes of that this summer. It's been very popular. The school resource officers have also, in the last couple of years, been tasked with trying to organize a national night out. When the auxiliary kind of lost some of its momentum, we had a year without national night out, and then we brought it back more on the concept of an individual get to know your neighbor type of crime prevention. And that's what the National Night Out official website was supposed to be, not a big party where everybody brings out all their equipment in one centralized location. And so we kind of decided with that year off that we would want to reinvent it with this neighborhood party. And we try to visit all the parties. We bring in some guys on overtime, and we bounce from party to party and try to get them all, but it's been pretty popular. And so we try to spend at least 15 or 20 minutes at each party, talk to people in the neighborhood. But a lot of it is get to know your neighbors, so that way when there's crime happening in your neighborhood, you feel comfortable reporting it, and you feel comfortable with your neighbors. And hopefully it'll be a safer community when you know who your neighbors are and that you socialize with them, or at least know who they are. School resource officers did an excellent active shooter training a few years ago, where we trained all school personnel in an active shooter drill. We had classroom and scenarios. We actually fired off a couple blank rounds in the high school, so they could hear, because the question was asked by some of these teachers, I've never heard a gunshot. What's a gunshot sound like inside a school? So we fired a couple blank rounds, and it was effective.
Will you do that like yearly?
Yearly, we had to really work hard with the school, and one of the teachers' days that they get the kids off, one of their in-service training days is what we utilized. We'd love to get back there again, in like a regular rotation, but I'm not sure if that's been planned yet. So our school resource officers are trained in what's called the Alice technique too. They don't necessarily teach it specifically by the book because they don't completely agree with it, but they have the certifications and they kind of teach a hybrid of it, pulling like the best from Alice and the best from, I think it's a free program called, it's just an active shooter program. It's free that's out there.
And their acronym is the same as it's asset limited. Is that what it's basically like someone
Alice.
under
Do you remember what
resource,
Alice stands
asset
for?
limited income?
Yeah.
We have an
No.
acronym like in social services that's
Alice was the name
It's an acronym.
No, it's an acronym for active
in
something.
poverty, it's like asset limited community.
It's like active, locate. It's the steps of what you do.
Okay.
Alert,
That makes sense.
alert, lockdown, inform, counter, evacuate.
Yeah. There you go.
of.
Steps of what you do to evacuate.
The one that we were teaching before we became Alice certified was just run, hide, fight.
Run, hide, fight?
Yeah. And that was a free one. And I think that's easier to remember than Alice.
Yeah, for sure.
But,
Yeah, because there is like a poverty acronym that's Alice and it's asset limited, but corporate. Yeah, that's what they're called.
We give tours of the police department quite frequently to scout clubs, scout groups, clubs. I've had group homes come in and I've done tours for Leadership Troy and Teen Leadership Troy and the Mayor's Youth Council are some of the people that I know we've given tours to. Sergeant Masarian is very active in some of our programs that we offer. He does the crime watch meetings throughout the city. He teaches a rape aggression defense course. He's been involved in some church security meetings and programs. Car seat checks. He's been involved in alcohol server training that we put on a couple times. Am I missing anything?
His rad class is like in a high demand right now, and I know COVID, but we basically want to rent him and for like whole classes because we have so many people that want to do it. But again,
I have 85 on the list right now from this past spring. Waiting. So I'm hoping this spring we can start.
that's great.
And that's it. That's my presentation tonight. Joel was the closing. So.
Any questions?
Any questions?
Yeah.
I say, you go, boy. You do a good job.
All right.
So I need Major.
Thank you for coming in. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
That was awesome.
Who's next?
So
17th and fire chief will be presenting.
Say it again.
On 17th meeting, fire chief will be presenting.
So if you have any specific questions for him, and I keep him on track, give him an outline. Otherwise, he'll do it.
Are we submitting like a time frame of what that presentation can look like? Like we should say that.
Oh, they'll go over 5 hours on your presentation?
No, what is it?
I thought I did pretty good compared to last time.
I think you were really good.
No, I like it.
I would say,
I enjoy it.
Yeah, he'll talk about that half hour.
Yeah. He said
mm,
45 minutes. He's got a really good internship program.
Yeah, the apprentice program, you ought to highlight the opioid, the QRT program. concept that we've implemented.
So we have the fire chief at the next meeting.
Wonderful.
That's the only person that is scheduled.
Yes.
That should be good.
Right.
Okay, Mr. Nathan.
Okay. That's all you need.
Sorry. I keep talking over something.
We can't hear you.
It got really low, but I'll second it if.
I was just gonna ask, do we have any public comments?
There is no public.
Okay, I can't see the room from here, the whole room, so it's going to happen. All right, so I guess we can move to adjourn.
Yay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Well,
Bye, Marvin. Bye, John.
Take care.